The rise of transgender activism, amplified through the medium of Twitter, has turned any kind of discussion about gender into a minefield. Author J.K. Rowling is now being accused of writing a transphobic novel after she insisted on making a distinction between biological women and transgendered biological men. In a public policy think tank like this, it's tempting to steer well clear of this fractious debate. But we can't. The transgender ideology is having an impact on public policy, whether we like it or not, and on the right to free speech. Senator Chandler now finds herself answering a complaint from Equal Opportunity Tasmania for voicing her opinion. The complaint's utterly fallacious, of course, but these things end up taking chunks out of your day that a senator should be spending on matters relevant to the future of the country and their community. The long and the short of it is that as public policy makers, we need to get a handle on the moral complexities of these discussions, or risk conceding ground to the illiberal forces who choose to turn issues of sexual identity into political battering rams. Madeleine Kearns is a staff writer at the National Review, who's contributed some intelligent and courageous thought on this topic. She joins me from New York. Madeleine, thank you for joining me and welcome to Watercooler.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
You've been writing, I think, some very brave pieces on transgenderism and the issues around that. And you know, I know that's a very difficult thing to write about, I mean, or even comment about when you look at J.K. Rowling. What do you think of J.K. Rowling's experience, first of all?
I think that it's funny. So I'm stealing analysis here from my colleague Jay Nordlinger, where he says, you know, it's very easy for people to say, oh well, that person has loads of money, so it's not actually brave for them to take a stand. But actually, there's much more to life than money, and there's much more to human relationships than money. And I think the fact that this is somebody who has built up a reputation and has been just so loved and admired by liberals and progressives, and very much one of them. I mean, if you look at her views on all sorts of things, she knew what she was doing when she got involved in this fight, and she did so anyway. And I think that genuinely is quite brave, and I really admire her for it. She could have just sat this one out. She could have just said, you know what, I'll just from the sideline and see what's going on. But she said, no, actually, this is a totally reasonable and defensible position. And she actually originally weighed into this on Twitter in defense of a woman who'd been fired, who'd lost her job for saying completely reasonable, common sense things on Twitter about, you know, biological sex. And she said, look, I think it's not fair for people to be fired for this reason. So I'm just very admiring of her, and very appreciative of her signaling that actually this position can be perfectly mainstream. So I do think that I've almost turned into, like, every time one of these things happens, I'll like write another piece explaining why no, actually J.K. Rowling is not a transphobe. I mean, I don't know how many times I'll keep saying this, but they just won't give up. They just keep going for her head. I mean, the latest controversy I'm sure you saw was about her new crime novel that she published under her male pseudonym, which is kind of ironic actually in a sense. But she published this crime novel, and everybody, one reviewer at the Daily Telegraph suggested that a character who had one page of this 900-page novel, in one page, in one paragraph, puts on a woman's coat and wig, that this was a transvestite serial killer. And the moral of the story, this 900-page story, was clearly that you could never trust a man in a dress. No man in a dress in the book, by the way, as Nick Cohen at The Spectator pointed out. But in any case, this gets picked up by the LGBTQ plus propaganda website, Pink News. And then this starts this big uproar on Twitter. And then you have these sort of middling celebrities of middling talent weighing in, like Jedward, who once appeared on X Factor in like 2012 or something, and evidently share a brain as well as a name, saying things to her, saying things that we should burn J.K. Rowling's books. We should burn them, because how progressive is that, really?
Yeah, look, we're obliged to say, even though they won't listen to us, we're obliged to say at this point that we are not transphobes. Neither you nor I suspect. That we have friends who are, have transgendered. I've interviewed a very brilliant transgendered woman on this podcast not so long ago. So let's put that one to bed, if you like. So what is the problem here? I mean, what is it? Why is it that we find ourselves on the unpopular side of this argument, if you like?
Well, it's very simple. It's that there's a point at which you're right to do what you please with your own body and so on and so forth. It cannot cross the line into demanding that other people say things that they do not believe to be true and which are clearly not true. And so the problem is that you talk about the transgender people who are in no way extreme, and it is important to differentiate between the activists and the people they purport to represent. That is true. But what the activists are saying has to be met with determined opposition. What the activists are saying is that you can literally change your biological sex. You can literally change it. In fact, they're saying two contradictory things at once. You can literally change your biological sex, but not only that, your gender identity, your inner sense, your soul, if you will, determines what sex you already are. So you already are the sex you think you are, but you can change your body to match that sex. They use this language, it's very confusing, it's very convoluted, that you're assigned a sex at birth, and then after you are assigned this sex at birth by some whimsical god or careless doctor, and it turns out it was a mistake, that you can then override this with your gender identity. And actually, if you don't even want to change your body, if you don't even want to change it, you don't have to, but you still need to be recognized for this inner sense that you have. So if you felt that you were transgender and you now want to be treated as a woman, you wouldn't even need to really put on a dress or do anything. And so the problem becomes, well, if somebody claims that they're a woman, do we in law and in life accommodate that belief? Well, no, actually we don't. Now, of course, there's a distinction to be made here. If the point is that somebody is deeply unhappy and uncomfortable with their sex and would rather present as the opposite sex because psychologically that alleviates some of that suffering, okay, that's one thing. And that is actually how transgender people just were part of society before this became a big, huge thing, right? Was that it was worked out in relationships of mutual trust and respect, and you maybe if you're in the bathroom, you're washing your hands, you kind of double take because based on facial structure and all the rest of it, generally like 99% of the time you know if somebody's a man or a woman just by looking at them. You maybe double take, and if you do this internal risk assessment as a woman, you think actually no, this person seems fine, just hello, how are you, yes, be polite, and you get on with your day. Now, when that was happening, when transgenders and transsexualism first became a possibility, you would kind of assume at that point that that person had had surgery and that person had had hormones and all the rest of it. But the transgender umbrella is now so wide that it could cover, as I said before, somebody like yourself who is just a man in man's clothing who claims some identity and has to use the bathroom of his choosing. This is obviously not acceptable to mandate and give away the rights of women and say that that person has a right to be there and that no person is allowed to say, I'm sorry, it's actually, I feel uncomfortable. And so actually what it's done, this relentless aggressive push has actually harmed the relationship that trans people had with society, okay, because it's turned it into this big issue and it's made women really angry. And by saying that the top down, you want to take away their rights, it's made them say, well, no, I don't want anybody. I don't want any man in my bathroom. I don't want any man, claiming that he has a right to be in my women's team, club, whatever, you know. And unfortunately, that's done a great deal of harm to everyone. It's really upset the whole balance. So it's just, and the point I just have to keep returning to it is it's just that it's based on something that's not true, and it's based on something that's obviously not true. The whole point, and when this started, was that people had surgeries and hormones and wore clothing to alleviate very complicated psychological trauma, and that they should be accommodated insofar as it's reasonable. Okay, I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally on board with that. But the insofar as it is reasonable and the accommodated while they present as the opposite sex is not what's being advocated. What they're saying is these people are the sex and they have to be accommodated, because anything less than accommodating them is an erasure of their existence, and is not only that, is possibly contributing to widespread suicide.
Let's talk about how this spills out into the political arena. So here in Australia, Senator Claire Chandler in Tasmania has made a speech the other week in the Senate to say that women's sport should be preserved for biological women. And there's very good reason for that. There are studies that show that, particularly in contact sports like rugby, for instance, or even soccer, women are far more likely to be injured if they're playing against a biological man. I choose my words carefully. Somebody criticised me the other week, called me insensitive for talking about a transgendered biological man. I don't quite know how I'm supposed to describe it, but it does show the sensitivity around this. But on that issue of women's sport, so what happened was the Green Party in the Senate, of course, condemned Senator Chandler for her gross prejudice and insensitivity and so forth. The Labour Party on the centre left were just pretty much silent on it. And I think this is what's happening, isn't it? There's this great silence from people who consider themselves on the left particularly, who would like to speak out about it, but feel that they'll upset part of their constituency, a bit like possibly what's happening in Scotland. What do you think?
Yeah, so first of all, I actually want to pick you up on something you said about sensitivity and language. I think there's a very clear line to be drawn here. When you're having a political discussion, which is what we're having, then you have to use accurate and precise terminology. When you're having a interpersonal conversation, then you resort to good manners. So if I were talking to a person who was transgender, I would obviously use the pronouns, unless this was in the context of political debate, I would obviously use the pronouns and refer to them as they wish, because that's the polite thing to do. But if you're having a conversation about what this actually comes down to, you have to use the language that best serves your argument. So I am at the point now. At first, when I waded into this minefield, I was very, very careful. I did the biological man or the male and the whatever, and now I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I actually can't do that, because it doesn't serve my argument. I'll give you an analogy of why I think this is an important point. Can you imagine if there's a Christian and an atheist and they want to debate the existence of God, but that the atheist demands that throughout the entire debate, the Christian refers to him and all other atheists or all other Christians as children of God? Well, he would have to say, no, I'm sorry, I actually can't do that, because if I do that, then I've already lost the debate before we've even had it. So this is the problem, is that it comes down, the absolute nub of the issue is that you can't, well, my position, I don't dare to presume what yours is, but my position is you cannot become the opposite sex, and you are not the opposite sex because you feel that you are. Materially, physically, biologically, that's just the truth. That's as I think it's actually a fairly obvious truth, because like what's more likely that your sex is determined at birth and observed, or that there's this mysterious gendered soul through some process of Cartesian dualism where there's a soul split with the body, that the soul then supersedes the body and determines what you truly really are, and we're all supposed to just take your word for it. I mean, come on. That's just we're living in 2020. We don't believe in superstitions like that. I mean, you're free to. you know? So
Yeah.
I think that the language thing is how they've done it. The language thing is they have used and exploited the fact that most people, most liberally minded people, myself included, the small L liberal, most liberally minded people don't want to offend people, don't want to upset people, don't want to hurt people, and are perfectly happy for people to live according to their superstitions or whatever makes them happy. That's fine. That's fine. So what they do is they suggest that if you, in arguing your point, your political point, use language that precisely gets to the point of what you're trying to argue for or against, you are being hateful and you ought to shut up and you ought to talk as we talk, or you should really not be part of this debate. And I have a really serious problem with that.
Look, I think what you say about language is very interesting. So what you're suggesting is if we, as you naturally do, are you offended by that word? Okay, I'll use another. Are there any words? But in doing that, we actually ceding ground gradually in the debate. Is that what's occurring?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. In fact, this actually came up for me. I made a decision with actually an individual, a transgender individual who I'm saying individual, not representative of all trans people, not representative of anyone other than this individual. And this individual was such an obvious bad actor. This individual was a bully and a cheat and a liar and so many other things. I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to get into legal trouble. But the point is, this individual, I just thought, you know what? I believe this person is a man. And I think it is directly relevant to the argument that this person is a man. Because if the people at home knew and could see clearly and straightforwardly that this is a man, they would be horrified and think, I can't believe that man's treating women like that. That's not acceptable, And actually, the thing is, fundamentally, I believe that transgender women are men who do not like being men. And I am happy on a case-by-case basis individually to completely accommodate that and avoid as much as I can calling them men because that's upsetting. But in the context of a political argument, it is really important that I am as precise as I can be. And it's all the more important now that people are taking away your right to do that. People are being fired for saying what I just said. Lots of people would be fired. It would be considered this great blasphemy. Well, I'm sorry, but let's go back to my analogy. If the atheist cannot say, I don't believe you're a child of God, I believe you're a creature of evolution. If the atheist cannot say, I don't believe God exists, then you're not even having a debate. You're poking around the edges. You're gently tiptoeing and trying not to offend anyone. And maybe say, oh, well, maybe we're going a bit far here. Maybe we're... No, that's not how a debate should work. And regardless of your personal lived experience and all the rest of it, if you can't stand the heat, get out the kitchen. If you don't want to have the debate in frank terms because it offends you personally, you're not really the best person to be advocating your position. Because I cannot think of any other context in which somebody would be having a debate with someone and they would say, well, actually, it personally offends me that you would say that. So,
having ignited one Twitter storm, let's try and ignite another one. Universities, I'm interested in your experience of universities, what's happening to them in America, the sense that there's a return to segregation, which was real in my lifetime. We thought we got rid of it from ever. Talk on that subject.
Sure. So universities are full of young people, and young people are very confident and sure of what they think and don't really have very much experience. And so this is not a very good combination for generating ideas, actually. And so normally what the idea of a university was, you would go with your cocksure opinions and things about the world and all the rest of it, and you would meet people of different backgrounds and different viewpoints and different worldviews, and you would grow into a more open-minded person, a more well-adjusted person, a person perhaps who is more prone to heterodoxy, at least to entertaining and seriously engaging with alternative views. Unfortunately, that's not what happens anymore. You go to campus and there's just huge pressure to conform to certain orthodoxies related to gender, race, identity. And if you don't conform to them, then you are assumed to be a bigot, a terrible, awful person. And, the other thing about young people is not only are they prone to be very sure of their beliefs, they're prone to really, really care about what other people think of them. And so many adopt causes, and the causes are the causes of the age. So these are anti-racism and anti-transphobia and gay rights and so on and so forth, all very fine and noble causes. But because they've never actually met somebody who even slightly disagrees with them on any of these points, I'm thinking of Coleman Hughes, who's now at the Manhattan Institute, who is himself a person of color, okay, who just disagrees with the way that you interpret racism and the way that you solve it. So, he doesn't buy into critical race theory, for instance. Well, they've never met somebody like Coleman Hughes. And so when somebody like Coleman Hughes, either Coleman himself or somebody maybe who's not Black, suggests that actually I don't think that the country is intrinsically racist. I think that what's going on here is X, Y, or Z. There's this massive reaction because they think that this person is the monster that they've been looking for their whole lives, that this monster, this horrible, evil bigot, and they just go nuclear. And it's very sad. It's very sad because it's just the complete opposite of what a university education is supposed to do, and it doesn't solve anything.
So I can't let you go, of course, without asking you about the election, the forthcoming election in the United States. You're in New York. I guess everybody there around you is probably predicting a Biden victory. But what's your thoughts?
Well, I always avoid, as much as I can, I avoid speculation. But it does kind of look, if you're a polls guy or polls gal, then it does look like Biden's on track to win. The two things that caution me from being reading too much into that is, first of all, that what were the polls saying in 2016, right? But then the second thing, of course, and that accounts for, Trump voters tend to have higher voter enthusiasm, and whereas like with Biden, people were voting, with Hillary, people were voting more like against Trump, and it's a similar thing with Biden when you look at voting enthusiasm. But the second thing is, I think that the Democrats have made a strategic mistake on law and order in a lot of places. Now, Biden himself has been quite sensible in avoiding directly endorsing the more radical elements of the Black Lives Matter movement, sort of defunding the police and so on. But I think there's a general sense of really quite strong dissatisfaction across America with Democratic leadership in cities where crime is just going through the roof. And there was a similar thing with obviously Nixon in 1968 with the law and order thing, and there was a miscalculation. The progressives miscalculated the public mood and public atmosphere, and by the time of the election, people were they'd had enough of this nonsense. So I think that were it not for that, then it would be quite likely a Biden win. But I think, given that, I'm not actually so sure. I think it could go either way.
Well, thanks very much, Maddie, for your conversation today, and thanks for everything you write in National Review, in Spectator, and elsewhere. And be good to have you back on Watercooler again sometime.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks for having me.